Okay, let's look at another example where we have two transformations here. So we have uh, our b value here, and then we have our c value there. So we're going to go ahead and apply the b value first. So multiply all of our x values by that 2. Well, actually, by the reciprocal of 2. So we're going to multiply it all by 1/2. So times 1/2. So sorry, let's make sure it's the right color. Times 1/2 to every x value. Alright, so let's go ahead and evaluate all of these. Anything times 0 is going to be 0. Multiply straight across, we end up with pi over 4. Multiply straight across, we get pi over 2. Multiply straight across, we get 3 pi over 4, and then we get 2 pi over 2, which we know that's just going to simplify it to just be pi. Okay, so now that we dealt with the b value, now we're going to go ahead and apply the c value. We're going to subtract all of my terms by pi over 4. Remember, it's the opposite of what you see in there. So minus pi over 4 minus pi over 4 all the way down. Okay, so luckily anything minus 0 is just going to be whatever that anything is. Pi over 4 minus pi over 4, that'll give me 0. Pi over 2 minus pi over 4, okay, we have to get common denominators here, so pi over 2 minus pi over 4, I can multiply the top and the bottom by 2, so I get pi over 4, 2 pi over 4 minus pi over 4, which is going to end up giving me 3 pi over 4. Nope, 1 pi over 4. So 1 pi over 4. This one, luckily they have common denominators already, so we get 2 pi over 4, which we know is going to simplify to just be pi over 2. And then we need common denominators here. Let's put a 1 under there, multiply the top and the bottom by 4. So we end up with 4 pi over 4 minus pi over 4, which gives me 3 pi over 4. All right. Let's go ahead and let's graph the parent function first. So we have sine, which we know is going to start off at 0, then go to 1, then 0, then -1, and then back to 2 pi. So there's my parent. And before we go ahead and graph this one, I want to label the x-axis with values of pi over 4 since they are in our table. So this is going to become, this is negative pi over 4. This is going to be positive pi over 4. This is 2 pi over 4. This is 3 pi over 4. This is 4 pi over 4. But we don't actually write it as 4 pi over 4, right? We just write it as pi. And then we've got 5 pi over 4. Okay, and that's all we need. And we can keep going that way too on the x-axis in both directions. All right, let's go ahead and graph this graph in the blue. So negative pi over 4 will be 0. Then at 0 we get 1. Then at pi over 4 we get 0. Then at pi over 2 we get -1. And then at 3 pi over 4 we get 0. And we're going to draw our shape just like that. Alright, so let's go ahead and identify all the features. So we know the period here is just going to be 2 pi divided by the b value. In this case, the b value is going to be 2, so that's why we get a period of pi. So that's why we can see the new graph is just half the width of the original graph. Let's find our x-intercepts. I like to just label some of them. So negative pi over 4, then positive pi over 4, and then 3 pi over 4. So we can see the distance between them is 2 pi over 4, right? Which is the same thing as pi over 2. Zoom in a little bit. So pi over 2, and then the distance from there to there is pi over 2. So let's pick one of these to start with. Let's pick the negative pi over 4. It doesn't really matter which 0 you pick. Just pick one of them. And then we're going to add pi over 2, and then times that k value, which is just any integer. And that's going to be all the x-intercepts. All right, that'll give me all the x-intercepts, right? So if I go backwards, whoops. So if I go backwards, these are all going to be my, whoops, let me see. There, and there, right? So these are going to be all my x-intercepts. So it'll look something like that. Okay, so let's find our y-intercept. There's only one, so this one's going to be the point 0, 1. Our intervals of increase and decrease are highlighted there. You can see the increase is going to start at the x value negative pi over 4. It's going to go all the way to the x value of 0. And then it's going to start again at the x value of pi over 2, and then increase all the way to 3 pi over 4. Then for interval of decrease, it's going to be in between 0 and pi over 2.